you all for joining us. This is Digital Transformation in UK Universities, equipping students with the skills of tomorrow. It's the latest in a series of roundtable discussions in collaboration between Times Higher Education and Coursera for Campus. We've been speaking to senior leaders around the world over the past 6 or 8 months during a very unprecedented time for universities. And it's great to finally be able to engage with a group of leaders from UK HE, just to talk about how the market's changing, how your jobs are changing, how the interaction with students are changing, and hopefully share some insights both from the world of academia and also from industry, because we are joined today also by Mike Damiano from Coursera, hi Mike, who we've worked with previously and who has spoken at some of our THE events over the summer. So Mike will be able to give a kind of industry perspective and talk a little bit about, what Coursera are doing and how it relates to each of the discussion points. And today, from all of you, it would also be great just to get some insights about what's happening at your institutions and, what you think the success stories have been so far, what you think best practices for your institutions and the type of cohort and teaching staff that you have, and also what you think kind of needs to be done in future, both from, in terms of academia, government, industry. All of these different sectors play a part in shaping where we're going now, I think. So my name's Alistair Lawrence. I will be the chair of the discussion. I'm the special projects editor at Times Higher Education. And I'd like to kick us off just by diving straight into the first discussion point, and then perhaps the first time each one of you speak, if you can just tell us who you are and where you're from. That's probably the quickest way to get through the introductions. So the first point that we wanted to address today was how universities can meet the changing needs of students and teach them the skills that they need in order to really prepare them for a world that is changing at great pace, now faster than ever. So I'd be very interested to hear from anyone who could give us some insights into perhaps how they are talking to their students more since March, or how they are changing the way that they deliver their education offering, and what they found to be particularly effective during this period. Wyn, would you like to kick us off? Is that okay?
Sure, yeah, okay. So hi everybody, I'm Wyn Morgan, formerly Vice President for Education at the University of Sheffield. So great pleasure to be here. I think the interesting thing for me is how this has crystallised a lot of what was going on before. That this isn't entirely new, but it's sped up a lot of activity that was already in train. One of the things we've been doing with our students prior to the pivot was to reflect on the programmes as a whole, and trying to focus on what is it we want from our programmes and what do we want our students to be at the end of those programmes, because we had a particular problem, and I suspect colleagues will recognise this, of a huge plethora of degree courses, huge number of modules that didn't always sit together, just accumulated over time, and meant that we had a big work problem, we had a big assessment problem, and the students didn't necessarily know why they were doing particular things in the program. So talking about what skills do we need our students to have was part of that process of what do we want our degree programs to actually lead to. And I think a digital part was a key element within that, but I think it's come much more to the fore since March, not surprisingly, in a way that has changed not simply the interaction with students, that's clearly important, but actually some of the fundamentals of teaching. And that includes our assessment diet as well. And that's been one of our biggest changes. And why are we assessing in particular ways? And I think that's really helped our conversation with our students. Why exactly are we doing this? Why did we make everybody turn up and route march into a big hall and sit there for 3 hours? And, hang on, is that the best way of doing things? And actually, that's been, I think, the revelation for many of my colleagues has been how they can do things differently and more to the students' benefit as a consequence, and to their own. Their marking burden is much lower. So that's a very broad, I won't speak too much, but that's very much where we've come from and where we've got to in the space of the last few months.
Okay, Anne, I saw you nodding in agreement with a couple of Wyn's points. Can you perhaps tell us what the experience has been like at your institution, please?
Well, I can certainly share a little bit of it. Most is very, very familiar, and I think what Wyn said is right. I mean, I was just I was at the question I would actually have asked Wyn, and I may ask as a kind of rhetoric more than anything else, is why do you think it's taken us so long? I mean, in a way, I mean, it is a bit. I mean, I gave a talk. I gave a talk quite near the beginning of the pandemic, probably in June, which was actually, look, if we're going to learn anything, let's use the Chinese art of war. If you learn from a virus, behave like one. And think about what a virus pushes you to ask questions about. And it's a bit like the virus doesn't know it's Christmas. The virus doesn't know a whole series of things. It doesn't know when Diwali comes along. We've got to learn some fairly harsh lessons from this. And I think, I mean, when you kind of articulated some of them, which is, what is it we're trying to achieve? And how can some of these things actually make us much, much more agile, even about the way we use our campus? There are things that are better done online. There are lots of things that are better done face to face. And actually, we can use our campus better if we can get the things that we need to do online the best they can be, and then actually deal with things like, and the things that concern me particularly are things like digital poverty, which is a really big issue, I think, for universities. And the trouble is not all of them. And that's one of the challenges. And I think it raises some really big questions about if the Janet network, which has been great for us as a set of institutions, is really going to do something good for digital poverty. How do we share much more openly some of our resources? I happen to know Sheffield quite well. There's two universities in Sheffield. There's four in Birmingham. There's 40 in London. And yet, talk about protectionist. There's some real big questions to ask about open access in its true sense, and those sorts of questions. And for me, those are the big questions. I mean, I'm not saying Kingston hasn't done those sorts of things necessarily. In fact, that's been one of the challenges, is not necessarily doing some of those things that perhaps we could do, but they have been part of the conversation, and I think that's the conversation we should be having coming out of this.
Okay, thanks very much, Anne. Juliette, if I could come to you next, just because we were talking very briefly just before we started about the lockdown situation in Ireland. You're at Trinity College Dublin. As you enter the next stage of managing lockdown and managing people flow, how is that affecting your physical space on campus, and how in turn is that shaping your curriculum in the coming months?
Thank you very much, Alistair. And I just introduce myself. I'm Juliette Hussey. I'm the Vice President for Global Relations in Trinity. And I'm a professor in physiotherapy in terms of my academic role. And I mean, so much of what's been said is the discussions we've had. We had University Council this morning, and part of it, a discussion paper at looking at the future in terms of the digital transformation, but also at the way others have, the use of our campus. And there's been a lot of discussion. Like everyone, we went, very quickly online in March. A huge transformation was going to, getting rid of the examinations. We used to hire this huge kind of like warehouse plus, and they'd all queue, and it costs thousands of, and suddenly that was gone overnight. And I think that was transformative. And in fact, the only exams that had to be proctored were the medical exams. And that was they were because of our accreditation, and that was managed. So most of this term, whereas we spent a lot of the summer looking at how we could do sort of a blended approach, we then moved into level 5, which is the highest level in terms of restrictions, just before the semester began. So really most of the teaching is up online, apart from laboratories and the clinical and practical sessions, particularly in health sciences. And I think by and large, the teaching, despite everything happening so quickly, my impression is that the teaching is going reasonably well and the students are well engaged. I think the huge problem we're seeing is obviously the loneliness, the amount of time people are spending on their own. But what I really see is going to be a big issue is so much of particularly the undergraduate education, but also postgraduate, is the engagement in clubs and societies. And that's a huge part of the Trinity experience. And that is really, you cannot replace that by Zoom. And, you know, students at the end of the day who've been on Zoom don't want to go and do other things on Zoom. So I think that's been a huge challenge. And I think that's what I think I'm almost pushing in terms of, as we come back into using the campus more, that we really try and facilitate that type of engagement, because the teaching is happening reasonably well. And I think probably as we go to next year, it'll be much more of a blended version. We did have a discussion today at council about, you know, how we would change. And I think people at this stage, they just can't wait to get back into seeing colleagues and being in the classroom. But that'll change again over time. I think that it's just because of the last 9 months, 8-9 months have been so restricted.
Okay, thank you. I mean, when we talk about teaching skills on the whole to students, I mean, is the fact that they are being deprived of the social aspect of going to university at the moment, that's almost making the job harder, isn't it? Because, you know, you're talking about how you increasingly need soft skills for employment or soft skills for personal development, you know, problem solving, teamwork, critical thinking. If you're limiting somebody's in-person physical interactions, I imagine it makes that job even harder.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, we've sort of really articulated what the graduate attributes are. And very basically, you know, they're to think independently, act responsibly, communicate effectively, and grow continuously. But we really believe that they're developed both through the curriculum and the extracurricular activities. And it is expected, you know, many students have become very engaged in clubs and societies as they move through, they take on leadership roles. And many of them develop their careers through their interests that they've developed in those areas. So it's a critical part of their overall education. I think that's something that's really, it's much more challenging to replicate.
Okay, great, thank you. Simon, if I can come to you next, if that's all right. You're joining us from Lancaster University. I was wondering, what's the period of flux been like for yourselves, and, you know, how are you addressing the challenges that we're talking about today?
That's a very big question, and
yes,
particularly because for colleagues that don't know, I should introduce myself perhaps as well. So I'm a Pro Vice Chancellor, and my short title is Global, but within there, interestingly, is responsibility for the international strategy, but also for our digital strategy and also for sustainability. So it's kind of an unusual but particularly relevant connection of responsibilities at the moment. And we have 4 international campuses, including one in China. So we had very early exposure to the need to kind of pivot online, which we learned a lot from, actually. And it helped us as also our digital strategy. We were already rolling out, for instance, use of Teams across the campus for meetings. So it gave us a little bit of an early lift in kind of that you know, cold bath experience in March when we all had to pivot online. So I would say, I think echoing some of the comments I've already made, that our experience of moving online in terms of operating the university as a business, in terms of meeting, in terms of delivering our teaching, continuing research, etc., has gone pretty well. And I think, as we've said across the sector, colleagues have been truly remarkable in their creativity and resilience that they've shown after those few months. And I think that's without exception across the sector. But I also recognize some of the issues that other colleagues are talking about in relation to the campus life, in particular Lancaster at Bellrig. For anyone who's been, it's very much a campus. It's key part of our offer, our USP in a way. And while we've managed to continue working to some degree in a blended mode, we're continuing in blended at the moment, and plan to do so in the new year as long as we're permitted. It's been obviously challenging to continue that campus life and that campus vibe. So it is actually the more informal interconnections which are the challenge, and dealing with issues of kind of loneliness and lack of connection and worries about growing kind of mental health issues. Interesting, a lot of colleagues are talking now about the pedagogic advantages of teaching online and are reporting much greater engagement with students through online teaching than they were face-to-face in the big lecture hall. Slightly embarrassing for us that one of the last major estates projects that we're just completing is a brand new large lecture hall, which we're now having to think what we do with going forward. But actually, those colleagues are saying even when we can come back, they're not necessarily would not necessarily choose to just go back to the lecture hall. And in fact, they would rather be thinking now about how they can complement their online teaching with different kinds of student engagement. And that in turn, I think, has already been suggested, means that we need to start reimagining the campus. So already in terms of our estates strategy, and we've paused our capital program partly because of short-term financial challenges, but we're now starting to think more creatively about, as we rethink our capital program, when we can start it again, we will almost rebuild it. We've actually just made the declaration of a climate emergency in our council meeting, was agreed last Friday, just announced on Monday. And that, of course, makes a difference as well to how you think about a capital program and how you probably start moving into an approach where you remodel and reuse and repurpose and recycle the estate you already have. So I think there's some really interesting, challenging, but interesting opportunities around our campuses. All of these things are interconnected. Another challenge in relation to the students that we've reported in conversation with students actually is not around the formal teaching. It's more the informal peer-to-peer, student-to-student learning, particularly for first years as they enter into university and make that transition. So that kind of walking into or out of the lecture theatre together, where they're able to say to other, what on earth was Professor Guy talking about? I have no idea of you. They're not getting the chance to have those conversations. And they're saying even the student-only elements of Moodle that we have are not really fit for purpose. They're not replacing that. So they've asked us to work with them to try and help reimagine that and support that kind of student-to-student interaction digitally as well. So that's a real challenge. So maybe I should stop there so other colleagues have a chance to talk. But I think it's a really mixed experience. There's a lot of learning I think we can have from the past 9 months. And we have a project which I'm leading around the futures of the university, which kind of is running alongside our strategy, which is trying to challenge some of our conventional thinking. And, Lancaster is both pioneering in some ways, but very conservative in others, to be honest. And so, how do we start to really challenge things and learn the lessons and sustain some of the innovative practice we've been involved in the past 6 months? And that seems to me the real strategic opportunity. I'll pause there, thanks.
No, that's great. No, thanks, Simon. It's great to have a detailed answer from you. Jane, I was wondering if I could come to you next. You're from Nottingham Trent, which has a long reputation of being a very forward-thinking institution, and not to shamelessly plug THE, but you're a former University of the Year winner. So yeah, I've got to get that in there, right? But yeah, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how we're talking a little bit about sort of the need to maintain what I suppose is a digital estate, really, when we're preparing students for the future. And yes, there are these huge challenges at the moment about, there are certain things that are very hard to replicate on campus. But I'd be interested to hear about this, the kind of the interactions that you're having with students to try to listen to them and help prepare them better, both for moving through university and what comes afterwards.
Thank you, Alistair. Yes, I'm happy to do that. I should say to colleagues, I'm currently the interim PVC education at NTU. I was stepped up for a short while before the pandemic, and then I've been asked to stay on as these things happen. So for a while anyway. So before the pandemic, we were just shaping up our new strategy for the institution for the next 5 years, as I'm sure lots of people were. And we were thinking a lot about flexible learning. We were concerned about rapid skills obsolescence, automation, the impact for our graduates, and that need to support upskilling for certainly regional development, probably wider than that, in the kind of lifelong learning population. And we were thinking not just about what we're teaching, but how we're teaching it and the types of qualifications that we were offering. We were going to attempt a pretty radical change on the types of qualification we're offering over the course of the 5 years of the plan. And then the pandemic hit. And I think the change for us on that is going to be pretty profound. So things that we have learned, Alistair, you're asking, working with our students as we have done through this. First of all, we took a highly systematic approach to moving online. I don't know whether other colleagues have done that. Other institutions have done that. I suspect you probably have. And we achieved a lot of things that would have taken us, frankly, years to achieve if there hadn't been a pandemic. Colleagues nodding. So we have changed assessment permanently. I think, as Wyn was commenting, those temporary changes we've just discovered that, oh gosh, look, exams weren't that good after all. If only we'd listened to Jane for the last 5 years, we would have known that. We've changed our delivery, if I may call it that, and there are permanent changes we're going to make to that. So I think Simon was saying that colleagues have discovered that students are engaging better with certain types of teaching when doing them online, and are going to keep that afterwards. We've had a huge polarization, if you like, in the very highly practice-based subjects are experiencing this in a very different way from those that might be more text-based and discursive in their approaches. Really, really different. And so every time when we're on the lockdown or tier roller coaster, so everyone in English and business goes, yay, if we're about to be locked down a bit more, but everyone in art and design and veterinary nursing goes, no. And that's something we've discovered amongst the students and the staff. But we've brought in much more support. So Anne was talking about digital poverty, and that's really hit people really hard. We've seen disadvantage up close, I think, in this, even through the medium of Teams. So we brought in much more student support, much more staff support around the communications that we're doing. We've brought in schemes, equipment loans and software deployment that would have taken us ages before, but we've just done them and we'll probably keep them. We've done much more work around staff digital skills and student digital skills and employability skills, partnering with Microsoft in particular, and brought that on board much more quickly. We've also understood educational developers have been going on about supplemental instruction and peer supported learning for what feels like generations. We've just discovered in a really, really meaningful way that, yeah, that kind of really is important. And we're the things that we're rolling out now, we will keep a lot of those. So I don't see us snapping back to how we were ever. But going back to the point that I made at the beginning around automation and skills obsolescence, and we have a program of work called NTU Flex. We were going to try and get every course to offer something fully online, and a fully online module, perhaps with micro-credentials, different use case scenarios. That was going to take us 5 years. We really feel that we can accelerate that. And I think that this will also have a profound impact, not just on the mode of how we teach and what we teach, but also on the type of qualifications that we're going to offer, because we've suddenly really realized what we've always talked about, that it might not all be about 3-year degree programs, that actually what the world might need is something much more flexible than that. So that felt like a very long speech. I hope that's what you wanted me to talk about, Alistair.
It's absolutely, no, it's fine. It's one of those things, I think, with especially doing these on Zoom, everyone's like far too polite to kind of chip in while a colleague's talking. So, but then if you're the speaker, you feel like you're having a spotlight shone on you and being asked to give us a complete overview of what's happening at your institution. No, that was great. Thanks very much, Jane. Eleanor, if I come to you last but not least, just from Strathclyde's point of view, because just to pick up on Jane's points about the aspect of lifelong learning and the way that's being supported, I think I'm right in saying that Strathclyde has a centre for lifelong learning, yes, and it's something that seems to be very central to your offering. Has there been a lot of change in the delivery around that part of your university since March, or is it just underlining the importance of it?
Okay, thank you, Alistair, and hello everyone on the call. My name's Eleanor Shaw. I'm a Professor of Entrepreneurship and I am Associate Principal with responsibility for entrepreneurship and education. I don't think, Alistair, that what we do within the Centre for Lifelong Learning could be singled out as doing anything different from what's happened across the rest of the university. As colleagues have indicated, at pace, probably over the period of a weekend, we pivoted from on campus to online, and we've been dreaming about possibly blended at some point, but unless there's a very critical need to get back into a laboratory, that ain't happening, and it doesn't look as if it's going to happen anytime soon. So it does mean that we've been running an online program or a portfolio of online programs since March. in terms of the things that we've been doing, I would echo all the comments that the colleagues have already made. I would absolutely echo those comments. And one of the things that I've enjoyed is changes that I wanted to drive through that I thought, I mean, Jane, when you're saying it was going to take 5 years to bring out NTU Flex, so things like that, we've been managed to bring them out, in 3-6 months, and people kind of, what? How did we manage that? So I think, Anne, and when you mentioned this, we really need to take a lesson from what we've done over the past, however long it's been, and, be more agile, get rid of universities require governance, that's correct. They require compliance in certain areas, but I think universities before now were super brilliant at governance, at compliance, at bureaucracy, and were really poor at agility, speed, taking any decision and then implementing it. So I'm really excited about all of the different things that have happened, and my hope is that we just cling on to those really positive changes and use them as levers to allow us to continue to implement. One thing I'd be interested in asking colleagues, we've been surveying our students to ask them how they've been finding it, and I've been tasked with analysing some of that data. And certainly this does echo the comments you're making, but we now have the evidence that shows students love, there's no surprise in this, they love not having to go to a lecture and engaging with that material when it suits them in bite-sized chunks, but they're really suffering from that lack of engagement with others. And it's everything. It's the inability to go, as Juliette said, to the clubs and the societies. They were using Zoom to begin with, and everyone's just fatigued with it now, can't be bothered anymore. But the other side, the educational side, in the traditional sense, sitting down with a cup of coffee after a lecture or a tutorial and talking over what's happened, really struggling with that, particularly, as has been said, first years, probably first year PGRs as well, PhD students coming to a big city for the first time, really challenging. And I'd be really keen as to what I've been listening to Brené Brown quite a lot, and she talks about not just communicating, but connecting. So I'd be keen to find out what we could do as a sector to learn from one another, to help our students connect, because I think they're really, I think they're well educated, but they're just not they're not having the opportunity to connect on all levels in the way that they previously did. So I don't know, Alistair, if I've answered your question.
No, that's fine. Thank you. No, I think it's definitely, from having sort of these type of discussions, I said there is some sort of variation from country to country when we do these with different types of different countries, but the common threads remain the same. And it's like, how do you solve the problem of basically robbing people of a social interaction when they're trying to study and when they're trying to grow as people? It's very difficult. Mike, I'm not expecting you to solve this single-handedly, but I am aware that Coursera does a lot of diligent data collection. Also, I should say that Mike's joined by two colleagues from Coursera today, Francis Quirke and Bhavin Bakalia, who work with him in the EMEA region. But Mike, I've seen you talk at our events over the summer, and obviously had other conversations with you about this. And it's a tough nut to crack, getting students the sort of social support and the social networks that they need. But I think one of the things I'm right in saying that Coursera really do is they sort of place a value on collecting quality data to try and help support educators. And also the other big strut of what you do is, you are collaborating with industry and have a history of doing that. So when we start to talk about preparing students for the future, there is a lot that Coursera have already done. When you look at the Coursera for Business platform, which is now, the Coursera for Campus platform is growing in a similar way, but is younger than it. So I was wondering if I could ask, what are your thoughts on sort of providing a bit more support for students, providing more support for educators too, really, so they can get the data that they need to really try and help their colleagues, but also help the people they're teaching?
Yeah, thank you, Alistair, and good to see you again. So I'm glad you not asked me to solve the problem of social interaction, because it's going to take a lot greater minds than I've got to do so. But we are seeing some things happening, and there's so many threads I want to pull on. From what I've heard today, the thing around digital poverty, Anne. I mean, we work with a number of institutions across Africa, And of course, we're talking about digital poverty there, where they're paying like, $2 a megabyte to get course downloads. And so we're working out how we can get zero rated. But actually, we're working with universities that have students that don't even have access to electricity, let alone a laptop or a phone. So working out how we can address that. Simon would love to dig more into the University of the Future piece, where we're actually working on a paper around that ourselves. And then on the kind of whole mental health area of things, whilst we don't necessarily provide, we certainly don't have a virtual platform like Second Life that anybody can get into and start engaging with each other. But interestingly, the most popular course in the UK over the past 6 or 7 months has been the science of well-being. So we've got about 2 million learners in the UK alone on the Coursera platform, and 125,000 of them have taken the science and well-being course from Yale, which is by far at the moment, unsurprisingly perhaps, our most popular course worldwide. And by the way, any of your students and staff can go onto the Coursera platform and take that for free. Second was machine learning. So clearly there's quite a wide range of skills that learners want right now. And it is wonderful to hear, having someone who's been involved in education and education technology for 24 years, to hear people like yourselves talk about the pedagogic advantage of online that faculty and academics are starting to realize now. And I think this group is a great case study in never let a good crisis go to waste. Because we're now starting, we've gone through the emergency period now, and we're now starting to understand what can work and what can't work. And this acceleration of digitization in an unfortunate period has actually been wonderful to see from someone who sits perhaps outside of a university campus. What I would like to dig in then, and in terms of the data, to answer your question a little bit, Alistair, we're focused really on, Jane, you were talking about, the automation of skills obsolescence, fourth industrial revolution. We already saw a massive gap between what employers were asking for and what universities were outputting. No universities don't create a product, but if I can be base, there was that skills gap, and up to 50% of employers saying they weren't getting what they needed. We already knew that with automation and the fourth industrial revolution, there was going to be a massive change, and very difficult to anticipate or predict change in what jobs were required. So that piece around agility and introducing agility into the learning environment was really, really important. We get a sense of learning how to learn and critical skills, and all those unfortunate terms, soft skills are really important. And then COVID came. And so COVID just was a tsunami on top of the perfect storm already. And unfortunately, COVID is especially hard hitting to those who have less education and are in those jobs that could be at risk for automation. Mm-hmm. So more now than ever, I think, governments, individuals, communities are looking to education to help them through this. So actually, I think it presents a fantastic opportunity for universities and colleges who have learned now to be more agile to actually address that. What we, in terms of what we've done over this period, we were in Coursera. Many people will know Coursera for if you like, the MOOC platform. So we've got a number of 165 university partners, but also about 40 industry partners, Google, AWS, IBM, the like, who produce gateway certificates. So very up to the minute skills that are required. We actually launched Coursera for Campus late last year. And so we happened to be in a useful position when the pandemic hit. And it was actually one of, I think, Simon, you mentioned there was a Chinese campus that your university had. It was actually Duke University that called our CEO and said, our Wuhan campus has just had to close down. We want you to make Coursera for Campus available free to every single university around the world. 2 weeks later, we made Coursera for Campus free to every single university around the world. And it wasn't just Coursera, it was the university community, all of our partners, all of our university partners and our industry partners that made that happen. And over that period, we've gone from Well, then it was 30 universities using the Coursera for Campus plan and about 40 million learners globally. And we've gone to something like nearly 4,000 universities that have signed up around the world. And we've gone from 40 million to 75 million learners. And so there's a huge amount of data. And we sit kind of in the middle of this ecosystem of 75 million learners, about 3,000 companies and governments that want those learners to have the skills that they need. And then we can then go to our university partners and our industry partners and say, please create courses that teach those skills. And having been created by data scientists and AI specialists, we're pretty good with data. So we're now starting to learn, what's happening in different areas around the world. And we haven't cracked it yet, but we certainly do have the ability, both at a global level, but also down to a regional and by industry level, start to understand where those skill gaps are, and how education providers can partner with both the learners and industry to fill some of those gaps.
Great, thank you, Mike. So, I think one of the key things that I've taken from listening to everybody talk today is that the agile response that was needed was, to be blunt, almost sort of provoked out of universities as a result of having this crisis laid at their door. Is the next stage of growth for UK universities in particular about scaling the offering? Because when you look at the requirement around upskilling and reskilling, the sheer amount of job losses that have been caused by the pandemic, and not just jobs that have been lost, but jobs that have been made obsolete, unfortunately, in some cases. Is there now a requirement for universities to increase the amount of partnership that they do with industry, or change the way that they partner with industry or local government? I was wondering if anyone's had those kind of conversations already, or if they think it's if they see a logical progression for where they're going. Jane, could I come to you? Oh, sorry, Wyn, but if I go to Jane and then Wyn after that, is that okay? Great, thanks.
Thank you, Wyn. I think you probably beat me to the hand, but I'm going to go first anyway.
Carry on, Jane.
I think the answer is yes, Alistair. But, or should I say, and the challenge is, particularly when we're talking about unbundling qualifications through routes that are not funded by government loans or grants, the question is who pays for the education, and if we can crack that. I know our university is lobbying hard, along with others at the minute, for the lifelong learning kind of funding, so that people can access that throughout their lives. It's not so much the model. I don't think the model is a challenge, although of course it's always a challenge. I think it's the funding model that exercises us about how we do that. So we've gone into, say, higher degree apprenticeships in quite a big way, which is very slow and it's very bureaucratic. And we need something faster, and we need something where the funding is more obvious. At the minute, particularly lifelong learners who want to upskill are probably largely reliant on their employers, if they have one, to pay for that for them. So I would see that as the main challenge we have to crack.
Okay, thanks. Wyn?
Yeah, I actually picking up on that, to be honest, Jane, is, the THE today is full of stories about the AMRC and the MIT of the North, which is all based out of our Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre. Now, at the base of that is apprenticeships and degree apprenticeships. Now, what we're offering there is precisely what we should be thinking about, that very flexible model of learning that allows people to be in work, but actually increase their skills base in a way that protects them, as Mike was saying, from the tsunami of problems that might happen globally, to allow them to upskill, etc. I think what's really important is place, where the institutions are and what they're doing in terms of their local economies, but also how you can offer something that I think the challenge for institutions is not simply about scale. I think it's about offering something of value to potential learners. And I think that's a more difficult one, because, we're not all going to suddenly run out. I mean, my day job is an economist. We're not all suddenly going to run out and teach 101 economics, because that wouldn't be a good use of resources. But what we could do is do something that is around the specialisms that lie within those institutions that reflect the need for the learners out there. And I think that's what we have to find. So it's not so much, as Jane said, it's not so much the process, it's the right thing. If that's a highly technical phrase, but it's the right thing to offer to the market. And I use market advisedly there.
Okay, thanks. Anne, if I can come to you next, please.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in Jane flagging, which I think is, something I've been interested in for years, which is unlocking time and credit, which is really what we're talking about in terms of, in its broadest sense. It's kind of like, well, lifelong learning is just about you learn when you need to learn, and what you need to learn when you need to learn it. One of the skills, of course, is knowing when you need it, which is one of the things you have to teach. The other bit is a conceptual bit for me, and it comes to Jane's comment earlier about, business students liking it and art and design students not liking it. And I'm not sure that should be a barrier, but it is. And it's about what the campus is for. And it's about, when all those students graduate from practical courses, and Simon and I come from similar backgrounds in architecture, and I'm an advisor on Simon's new architectural course, which happened in a pandemic, and I had a really fantastic conversation. But the conversation was really interesting because it was about place, and it was about, on the one hand, digital civic, and what does that mean? So what does it mean to be in a place but online? And when all those students graduate, they won't have a studio unless they find one, or unless they go out into the world around them and engage with that world. So there's a really interesting conceptual thing for me around this, which is what we've done is suck students into universities and they all mix with each other. That's great. But actually, if you read some of the latest stuff in terms of literature, there's a real challenge around that it's also sucking the best students out of other parts of the country. So when you don't have a university in a city, you suck the best talent into Sheffield or into Nottingham or into a city. One of the things that we can do in this context is to start to engage in a civic way and encourage our students to work locally in a community online. So they can learn from us online. They can also do things in place without moving and sucking them in just to conurbations. And I think it raises some really huge issues and real opportunities for us in terms of how the university network works, not just how we work as individual institutions, which is becoming a little bit boring, actually, and how we work across the piece to put all these brains together, and Coursera and people across the world to work in place in a very different way, which flips the university into a different position. And for me, that's the really big opportunity, one, to deal with not just digital poverty, but actually poverty and social interaction, and the role of a university in if you like, I hate the term, but levelling up other places in the world, and not just in this country, given all the things that Rishi Sunak has probably just taken away from the development budget and other things today.
Yeah, we've got 14 minutes. I think we can talk too much about the budget decisions on top of everything today. But no, it's a fair point, absolutely. Eleanor, sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, can I just respond? I want to give THE a little bit of a plug here, because as you start to talk about learning online and place and on campus, I think is it the THE live event tomorrow?
Yes.
Professor Stephen Heppel, who I've worked with in the past, who's great in online and also great in space, is actually speaking. I was working with him a little while ago on a concept around learning hubs, if you will. So it's from a paper he did like 4 years ago, and in that paper was mentioned the word, this could be used in a pandemic. The concept of using these empty shops, using these empty retail outlets, and putting in small groups, 8 to 12 students. They could be of school age, they could be of university age and responsible adults to support them, but the learning is beamed in. So that's a plug for THE for the live event tomorrow, because I don't know if he's speaking about it, but interesting stuff there.
Yeah, I think so. Eleanor, I just wanted to come to you because I saw you nodding in agreement with Anne's point about sort of how this is going to change the dynamic between universities and their locale. I was wondering if you started having those conversations already at Strathclyde and what they perhaps sounded like.
Yeah, well, I mean, I go further than that, and I don't think anyone will be in that much of a disagreement. I think the whole sector was already ripe for disruption. The pandemic's come along and it's disrupted it. And I'm actually positive about that. I think that's a really good thing. And if anything, wouldn't this be amazing if we could get universities to genuinely collaborate rather than compete with one another? And I understand the dynamics of competition and why we do compete with one another, but I also firmly believe that universities do have unique areas of expertise and knowledge and resource, and it would be great to imagine a future where universities really nurtured what they were truly brilliant at, and worked with others, signposting students. I actually think North America does this really well, if I'm honest with you. I've spent some time at MIT, and the relationships between MIT and Harvard are fantastic. Students wander in and out, up and down across campuses. I'm not sure if a University of Strathclyde student attempted to go to any of the other 3 local universities and sit in a lecture, what would happen to them. And that's not unique to Strathclyde. We need as a sector to really, again, that's something else that we should learn from. Sharing, it's great that Alistair, you've done things like this that encourage this sort of sharing of learning, sharing of intel, etc. More of that in the future would be great. And I know Anne spoke about the levelling up agenda, and it has become a bit of a catchphrase, but I also very much agree with what Anne's saying there. If we create digital campuses that provide an opportunity for communities that need really bright people to stay in those communities, then the ability of really brilliant online, like Coursera and others, brilliant materials that engage people, develop people, and you see it in LinkedIn. People will put a little badge, like micro credentials, and so they can build up this approach to lifelong learning. I think it's fantastic. My own husband's from Orkney. He wanted to move away from there, but many of his friends and family would have stayed on Orkney had they been able to get a really great education there. But that wasn't available at that time. I bet you now more bright kids will stay there, and they'll be doing loads of work around wave energy, sea energy, renewable energy, and contributing to knowledge that's much needed there.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, I don't want to turn this into one long plug for THE's various different business verticals, but we do have the THE Campus website, which has had a soft launch this year and is currently available from the homepage if you go to the professional tab. That will have a full launch on, I think, January the 1st, or certainly January next year. And the idea of THE Campus is that it's very much a sort of marketplace of ideas where people can foster collegiate relations and share best practice and share ideas in a way that is totally ungated and free for everybody to contribute to, and also to sort of break off pieces from as they need it and learn from. But we've got about 10 minutes left, so I'd just quickly like to, if you come to both Simon and then perhaps Juliette, just so you could tell us a little bit about how your university's location is hopefully going to play a key part in how you move forward and how you perhaps can form different kind of partnerships and engage with local communities in a different way. Simon, you already said that it's the, obviously the campus that you have makes you a certain type of university and a certain type of destination. How do you think that will maybe change or stay the same as the old sort of barriers start to dissolve and people can move around or not move around in different ways?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because Lancaster was one of the so-called Robbins universities from the early 60s, which was all about trying to take education out to other, perhaps non-metropolitan parts of the country. And Lancaster University has obviously had an amazing impact on Lancaster as a city. But I think if you look back from where we are now, we could be, I think, rightly criticised as, and certainly perceived to be, slightly distant, the university on the hill, whose engagement strategy often, was about giving public lectures in that very traditional mode. Now, in the past 3 or 4 years, we've made a change pre-COVID around our engagement strategy, created a Pro-Vice Chancellor for engagement who's been charged with building up the kind of connections that we're talking about. And I think COVID, and indeed, I think climate change and the climate emergency is creating a kind of renewed context for collaboration. So we're seeing now much more vibrant, much more urgent kind of relationships being built. But the point that I want to make when I put the hand up is, I think we need to be honest with ourselves as a sector. While I've praised this earlier about the creativity and resilience we've shown over the last 6 months, I still think we're essentially very conservative. It's great when we come together in events like this and we tend to put the more innovative people together. We talk about the innovative projects we're doing. But actually, if you look back in the core of the university, certainly I won't talk about the other institutions, but I can talk about Lancaster. It's still pretty traditional in terms of what it offers. And I'm involved now with a small number of colleagues trying to develop new approaches to things like micro-credentials. And we're running the face all the time of a kind of particular mindset and also hard infrastructures, student record systems, for instance, that have been set up and geared for a particular pattern of learning and particular kinds of students and aren't built with any degree of agility or mobility in mind. So the kind of society and the kind of business models we're talking about that we all aspire to perhaps and we all want to celebrate, and we can find small islands of innovation around, are not represented by the core business model and the way our universities are set up, including our campuses. So the opportunity but challenge here, I think, is to change the institutional mindsets, the investment priorities. So we've been talking about, no new wonderful shiny buildings. For the 30 million you spend on a building, what can you do around the digital infrastructure systems? Really quite a lot. So I think there's some hard senior level discussions about the balance of investment priorities between hard bricks and mortar and what we invest in things like digital, which are absolutely essential if we're going to realize some of the exciting opportunities that we're all talking about. And that's as important as one way as the kind of shiny new initiatives if we're going to get real transformation. Okay,
thank you very much. And Juliette, last but not least, if I can ask you a little bit about how things are changing. Obviously you're City University, but you're in Ireland. There's a unique offering there as well, and I imagine you're dealing with similar issues to everybody.
Absolutely, and I think some of the initiatives that were already underway are even more and more relevant because of the last 9 months. So I suppose just sort of maybe two main areas I want to talk about. Over the last number of years, there's been a huge focus on innovation and entrepreneurship. We're a sort of comprehensive university, but when in the sort of innovation and entrepreneurship, it's very much multidisciplinary, lots of different programs from undergraduate to PhD level, where really the focus is around sort of solving problem solving and global challenges and bringing lots of different competitions and different programs of engaging students together. So that's been very strong. We have, there's been a human capital initiative, which is a national initiative that universities have provided, it's been a different sort of like a funding round where in terms of the sort of future of work and different universities based on their own skills have gained. And we have a number of programs, particularly sort of like PG Cert diploma around the sort of innovation and healthcare innovation, and when came through today, innovation and climate action. So very much around multidisciplinary action. We also have a growth plan in terms of what we call E3, which is engineering, environment and enabling technologies, where our schools of computer science, engineering and natural sciences have come together in terms of a new research institute, but also creating new programs such as like engineering and environment, where students study together. And the in terms of, if you like, the space that will be in is classrooms, lots of makerspace, project area, open laboratories. So that was already in progress, and we have a small part of our campus that is actually, it's about a 10-minute walk from the city centre walled campus that we're developing, and that's what's in the area in Dublin, which is called the Silicon Dots, because we have all the sort of big IT, Accenture, LinkedIn, Google, all of them are in that area. And so it's an ideal place of having much more seamless interaction with particularly in terms of IT industry. And there's been a lot of other SMEs that have grown around that because of, if you like, the number of big companies in that area. So that's a big development. And I think the further we engage with particularly the community, the industries there, we're going to need to become ever more flexible in terms of, someone said, like the bundling of offerings that we provide. And I think we're already seeing that from being, a very traditional university, a lot more around certs, diplomas in these kind of growth areas.
Okay,
so
great. Thank you.
That's really the trinity. I'm going to have to go very shortly, and I'm
absolutely fine. No, don't worry.
Meeting.
No, it's fine. Everybody's nose to tail with Zoom meetings these days, and we're scheduled to wrap up at 4 o'clock. So I think that's a great place to end. Thank you all so much for your time. It's been hugely informative for me, and also I'd like to thank everyone at Coursera for joining us too. It's always invaluable to have their sort of big picture input on these matters. We very much hope that you can join us for THE Live tomorrow. It's a digital event, it's free, and you can register via the main THE website. And I hope that we can speak to you again next year and find out how you're all getting on. Thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for organising.
I know. Thanks a lot.